You're saying I can't play video games anymore? Like, yes, you can play video games. There's nothing wrong with you playing video games. But for you to prioritize it, you want to go and play Roblox instead of, if your kid's telling you he's hungry, like, feed your kid. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Am I Judas or Barabbas? Thank you for tuning in. Today, I am going to talk about a conversation that is uneasy. And I say that because that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is to get into topics or conversations of the stuff that people find uneasy, which is hence the name of the title of the podcast, which is Am I Judas or Barabbas? So today's topic is
towards men,
right? Because it's becoming a pet peeve of mine of the fact that I feel like men aren't stepping up anymore. Men aren't being men. We're having women raise men. We have way more, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with women leading, like being in the leadership position, but what I am saying is, I just don't feel like men are doing enough. Like here in Nevada, in the judicial system, there's way more female judges than men at this current time. So if you end up watching this a year later and you're like, oh, that's not true. Right now, at this point in time, in January of 2026, it is true. Anyways, I don't want to just target men and, you're like, oh, why are you going at men, all of us and stuff like that? Even though I think that's a good topic, but that's a conversation for a different time. Today, my specific targeted audience are fathers. I want to target fathers today. And the reason why I want to target them is because I know culturally, everywhere around globally, there's fathers everywhere, right? And there's not enough fathers stepping up. And I think it's something that we need to talk about so that we can stop forcing women to raise men. And you can make that argument of like, oh, well, women do it to themselves. You know what? That's not a horrible argument, but I want us to take accountability for what we do as men, as a society. And as a Hispanic man, I know it happens with different nationalities, different backgrounds, but I am focusing on Hispanics because that is where my experience would be most. I go to Mexico a lot. I go to El Salvador a lot. And, that's just what I tend to see a lot. And I do have a father, so I don't want you to think that I'm doing this video because I'm targeting men because I'm fatherless. But there's two main categories that I tend to see with this, and the first one would be, the two cycles that I see most often is where a man goes off, he gets a woman pregnant, and then sometimes they're married to them, sometimes they're not. They get her pregnant, and then they leave and go off leave for a younger woman or just for another woman, and now this woman is forced. These young ladies are forced to raise their children on their own. And then the cycle just continues. They'll have a daughter. The daughter grows up. She ends up finding someone just like her father who, even though she knew better, ends up getting pregnant. And then now she's stuck raising the children. And then the sons grow up doing the same thing. They grow up and now they get other women pregnant. And then they don't fulfill any responsibilities. And it's just a cycle that continues because the men aren't raised to know what a father is supposed to be, and then the women aren't being taught, they're not protected by a father the way fathers are supposed to protect. And then the second category that I tend to see is where a son, since we are talking about fathers, may break away from the fact that he just left his family. He'll stick around and stuff, but he ends up becoming the type of father who is like, I have clothes for you, you have food, and you have shelter, and that's it. I'm doing my job, and that's it. And, that's not enough. That's not I think don't get me wrong. I think there can be circumstances where it can be okay, where, mother passed away and you have two jobs and, you don't have time. Like, that's just the circumstance. That's how the cards kind of stacked up. And that's fine. But, and mostly, that's not always the case though, realistically. Just men that just think that they think that's all they have to do. They think that's being a father, when really, being a father is having a connection with your children, having a relationship with them. So as we get into this topic, there's a few questions I want you to ask and think about, which would be, who is your father? What is a father? We'll even find out what Google says a father is, and then what is your definition of a father? And before we answer those questions, I want to get into the topic as to like why I'm choosing this, right? And I'm choosing this topic because I think it's super important for young men to, hear what I'm going to say and think about what they want to do before they become a father, or if they are a father, like how do I be a dad? How do I do that? I didn't have a dad growing up. What am I supposed to do, right? And I think it's important for them to know, especially if you're a Christian, to know these godly qualities that you should have and attributes that you should have as a father. And then I also think it's just as important if you're a woman watching this, you're like, oh, this is for dads. Like, no, it's still equally important, because if you plan to have a family, you plan to marry someone, you plan to have children with someone, you also want to know what kind of qualities you should look for in a man, right? What kind of attributes they have and things like that. So let's start with answering the questions, right? So the first one was, who is your father? Some of us, biologically, you know who your father is. And, some of us have great relationship with our fathers. Some of us don't. Some of us, luckily would have, maybe you've gotten a stepfather who ended up filling that void. So you never really felt like you needed to get to know your biological father because they've been such a good father to you. And, fortunately or unfortunately, sometimes you just never got to know them. And I say that because I don't know what kind of personalities you really would have had. Maybe you're better off without them, or there could have been situations where, unfortunately, you didn't get to know them, just circumstances. Maybe they passed away or something like that. And the next question was, what does Google say a father is, right? And here's what artificial intelligence likes to tell us. It says fathers play a vital role in the children's lives, and their contributions can include a variety of things, such as providing support, setting an example, promoting inner growth, helping with development, being an authority figure, being trustworthy, being physically present. Usually father, a term of address for a male parent, or a man having or regarded as having the status, function, or authority of a male parent. So I want to ask you right now also, now that we've answered what Google says, what do you think? I want you to ask yourself, what do you think, a father is? What is your definition? Go ahead and pause this video at this time and go ahead and get a pen and paper, write it down, write some notes down of what your definition is. I'm going to grade you at the end. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not grading you. So just pause it, write some stuff down. There are no wrong answers, even if you are wrong, no one's ever going to know. So, and if you're continuing to watch, I'm just going to continue to talk. So as soon as you hit play, let's go. This is play right now. So the next question was, what is a father? And I'm just going to give you my definition right now. And here's what I wrote down. It's a father is a man who is responsible for raising a child while having godly traits, who is present and an example. A man who shows you right from wrong, who teaches you to be an upright citizen, who knows the Lord, leads by example, is a good husband, is a provider, and someone you can rely on. That's the list that I came up with. But not everyone cares about what I have to say, so we're going to go ahead and jump in and see what the Bible says, right? And we're going to start in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. Most of these verses are in ESV. And it says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So even though we don't really know what Jesus looked like, right? We don't know, when you see these pictures like, oh, that's Jesus, we don't really know what he looks like. But we have features from him because he's our father. And you're like, how do we have features? We have hands, we have nose, we have hair, we have features. And it's the same thing of like when you have your parents, right? Like, haven't you ever like been somewhere with your parents, and you have someone that just comes up, whether with friends or a stranger, and they're like, wow, you look a lot like your mom, or you look a lot like your dad. It's because you have features. You are made in your parents' image in the same way we are made in God's image. He's the creator of the universe. Before I get into full on definitions of what a father is, right, or what a father does, the first step, especially as a Christian, and I still think it's a great practice, even if you aren't a Christian, but I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, that's just old school. The first thing you should do is get married, become a husband, right? If you end up being with if you learn to love someone first and get to know them first instead of just having one night stands, or just having a good time, or the heat of moments, and you just jump into a relationship, or you just jump into marriage, or if you actually get to know whether you're compatible with someone first, that can save you a lot of headache in the long run. And so I think, even though this this podcast today isn't on marriage, I still think it's important for us to touch base with it, because I think if you're going to be a father, you should be a husband. So I'm just going to touch on it. There's so many verses about being a husband, but like I said, we're just getting the gist of it. And yeah, let's just see what the Bible says about that. It's in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 through 33. It says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband." So this starts off with, the fact that we are supposed to love our wives as Christ loves the church. We are the church. If you're a believer in God and believer in Christ, he is teaching us, leading us all the time. And that's what husbands are supposed to do. So we are, in a sense, the bride in that sense. And it's telling, and it says that he came and he died for us. So in the same sense, husbands should be willing to do anything for their wives. She love the way Christ loves. And then verses 26 to 27, it's pretty much, saying like, read the Bible with her, spend some time with her, give her the word, be an example, be pure, and, be realistic, be honest. Verses 28 to 33 says, it talks about, loving her the way you love your own body. And some of you might be like, dude, I don't even love my own body. I want to have a six pack. Like, look at this keg. And it's not really talking about in that sense. It's talking about loving your body as like, when you're hungry, you're like, dude, I'm hungry. Like, let me go get some food, or let me cook for myself real quick. Let me take care of myself because I'm hungry right now. I don't like this feeling. I don't want to starve. And sometimes we exaggerate that. And it's the same thing like if you're sick, right? If you're sick, you're not just like, oh, I'm sick, this sucks, I deserve this. Like, you're like, I'm sick, let me go get some medicine, let me sweat it out, let me do something to make myself feel better. And that's what it's saying you're supposed to do. You're supposed to treat the same way you would treat yourself, or the same way you should treat your wife. So maybe you should take some time, even if she's the one that predominantly cooks, maybe you should take some time, maybe once a week or once in a while or something, where you're the one cooking for her, you're the one providing for her, you're the one doing things that you like being done for you. And in the same sense, like if she's sick, like go get her medicine, go to Walgreens real quick, try to take care of her, the take care of her the way you would take care of yourself. And then it starts talking about how you become one, right? You're becoming one. And what that means is, when you become married, you are joined, right? Like, you're no longer, the Serranos and the Pattersons or something like that, right? Like, at some point you're two different families. You're two different families, and you meet and you get to know each other. But when you get married, you're one. Like, they're bearing your last name, and you're no longer two different. You're one. You're literally one. You're one household. So act like it. You're leaving your family to become a family. And then in verse 33, it says, love her. And it says must. It says must. So don't sit here and be like, well, I think you should love your wife, like, or it's a good thing. No, it says must, like you must. It's an obligation. This word is saying you're obligated to love your wife, and she's obligated to respect you. And you're like, well, she doesn't respect me. I tell you what, I'm pretty sure if you did all of these things and you took care of her the way you take care of yourself, and you love her the way you love yourself, she's going to respect you. She's going to be like, wow, like, you're going to earn her respect. All right, now that you're married, right? Now that we're married men here, let's get into, like, okay, what do we do now? We're expecting, right? We're expecting our kid. In Psalms chapter 127, verse 3, this is the NLT version. It says, children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from him. So first off, these kids are gifts. They're gifts. You're being rewarded. Even if you ended up having this child, before marriage and stuff, you weren't attempting to have a kid, like, they're a gift. They're a gift. You should be so happy at this point. Like, there's so many people that I know personally that struggle trying to have children, or have lost a child, on while being pregnant, and they're so sad and so hurt. And then there's people that just have kids and don't have anything to do with them. Like, you should be appreciative. You should be so grateful that you have that opportunity. It's a blessing in disguise, even if that wasn't what your plan was. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11, it says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. What does that mean? It means grow up, dude. Grow up. That's literally what it's telling you. When you were a kid, it was okay to be a kid, but now that you're a grown up, now that you're a man, be a man. It was okay for you to sit at home and play Roblox when you were little, or whatever you were playing at the time. But now that you're grown, dude, you don't have time for that. You need to go out, go get a job, go become a provider, go do things that your adults do. And you have responsibilities now. And if you're going to be like, oh, well, you're saying I can't play video games anymore? Like, yes, you can play video games. There's nothing wrong with you playing video games. But for you to prioritize it, you want to go and play Roblox instead of, if your kid's telling you he's hungry, like, feed your kid, then play. Like, do your priorities for it first. I ain't got time for no Minecraft. Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. So these next, and then I'm also going to read Timothy 6:11. These next verses are traits. It's like I said, almost everything I'm talking about here is literally for every Christian. But because this is stuff that men should know, that fathers should know, we're going to go over them. And as a father, here's what you should have, right? Galatians 5:22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. And Timothy chapter 6, verse 11. But you, O man of God, flee these things and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, gentleness. I feel like both of those verses are self-explanatory. That you should have that spirit of love. You need to have joy. Patience, that's something my dad didn't have. I still don't think he has patience. Kindness, goodness, have faith in God, pursue righteousness, honesty. You got to be honest. And what a gentleness, like, what that is. It's just being gentle. So those are the do's that you should have. But let's get into some of the don'ts, right? And we're going to go ahead and read Titus 1, verse 7. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard, violent, or greedy for gain. So saying have good character, have integrity. Don't be arrogant. Don't be so quick to be upset at the kid. If he's waking you up at 2 in the morning because he's crying because he's hungry, like, deal with it. Don't go out and getting drunk. You're like, oh, I'm gonna go get drunk. Drunk isn't good for anybody, and we all know that. Like, nothing good comes out of being drunk. Violence, chasing money. Like, it's okay to, maybe you work 1 hour overtime because you're trying to save up for something or whatever. But if that's your priority, if you're prioritizing chasing money instead of spending time with your kids, like, that's a problem. You know, um, these are all horrible qualities to have. Let's look at Colossians chapter 3, verse 21. It says, Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. And Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4 says, And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. So these are some more don'ts, right? It's telling you, like, don't tease your children to the point to where you're upsetting them or where you're discouraging them. Like, if they're drawing something, be like, dude, you suck. What is that? That's trash. Like, don't do that. Like, if anything, encourage them. Be like, oh, that's nice, but look, maybe you should draw circles like this. Try it this way. Try to help them improve, not sit there and just bash on them. I feel like my dad did a really good thing. Of like when I was playing soccer, like, he was so rough on me, and it was tough and it was annoying and I hated it at times when we would go to practice. But the couple things that I was never allowed to say when I was out on the soccer field with him was that, one, I was never allowed to say, I can't do that, or I suck. Those words were, he would get so heated, I was not allowed to say those words. But where I will say where maybe he lacked, like I said earlier, he lacked patience. And one example I can give you is, like, I remember when I was in kindergarten, I was learning how to read, and there was, a book, and I'll just make it up right now because I don't remember which book I was reading, but they were soft cover, and they were all floppy and stuff. But let's say it was about animals, and the first page would say, you know, the, and then he'd help me. He'd say the, and I'm like, the dog. Okay, next page. He'd like the. I'm like, the cat, the cat, and then he'd be like, the. Okay, next page again. Then it's like the. He'd get the notebook, the, and I'm like, like, that wasn't the best way to teach me how to read. But look, I'm reading now, so I got somewhere, right? I'm still not the best reader, but here we are. It talked about the admonition of the Lord, which was to include God in conversations, teach him who God is, teach him what when God tells you to honor your mother, honor your father, teach them like all the good things that God has, the good qualities of God. Teach them to have respect and all these things that you should have as a citizen, as what the Bible describes. Proverbs chapter 22 verse 6 says, "Train up a child in a way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." So, not to just continue to toot my dad's horn, right? But even though, like I said, I know he wasn't perfect, I just described two different things. One where he did great, and another where he didn't. But here's where I feel like he did really good. Because he showed me what discipline was. He taught me to be punctual on all these things. He raised me to an extent where if I was doing something wrong, he was quick, to correct me. And I've learned from that. I haven't departed from that. Because of that, now that I'm a grown up, I don't usually do anything dumb. I said usually, I don't know. I'm still prone, but for the most part, like, I don't. I won't. I'll still think about him if I thought about doing something. Now, actually, I think about more of God. I'm like, am I letting God down? And First Corinthians chapter 16, verse 13 and 14, it says, "Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love." So this is a funny breakthrough. I did some research on this, and act like men is the in the center of this verse, with the other attributes, right? Where it says, be watchful, stand firm in faith, be strong, and everything you do in love. And what it's saying is, or be done in love. It's saying that it has that act like men because these are masculine traits that we tend to mostly have, and or men tend to mostly have. But it's really speaking about in a spiritual sense. But he was talking about like as men. But let's go ahead and break down the verse, right? So it's talking about be watchful, right? That means like stay alert, and in the physical thing, it would be like, if your doorbell rings, like don't let your 3-year-old go and answer the door. Like you don't know who's going to be there. You got to be watchful. You got to be careful. You go answer the door. You don't know who's going to show up, right? But in the spiritual sense, it's saying like stay alert, stay away from sin, keep up with that stuff. That stuff can literally break your happy home. You don't have room for that. And then it's talking about being firm, be firm in the faith of God. You can't just be like, well, I kind of like be firm in it, like own it. You have to have a strong foundation. You can't be weak in those areas. It's gonna rub off in the rest of your family. And then it talks about be strong, right? And when we think about strength, we think of men, right? We think of war, we think of men. And I'm not saying women don't do these things, but that's what we think of. And it's talking about being spiritually strong, right? Being spiritually, stay prayed up, stay in your word, stay active in that, have leadership, have spiritual leadership, spiritual matureness. And then it talks about, having love, and it's having the love that Christ has for us, right? Having that fatherly love. And then like we it says acting like men, and what I kind of tend to think about, I think about my father in that, where it's like he taught me how to shake hands and have eye contact, and to walk up straight, have my chest out, like not like he taught me those things. He told me how to walk and how to talk and have a tone, and open the door for ladies. Like these are things that we should do, that show us like this is what a man looks like. Okay, and in the Bible, we're gonna jump into the prodigal son. I don't know if some of you may have or may have not heard the story, but I'm just gonna brief it for you. And it's a parable that Jesus is telling the people, and it's where there's a wealthy man and he has two sons. One of them is pretty much being, he wants to do things his own way. He doesn't want to stay at home anymore. He asked his dad for his inheritance. He's like, Dad, you know what? Let me get my money, and I'm gonna go. I'm out. And his dad is like, okay. He gives him the inheritance he was supposed to get later on, and he takes off. He parties. He blows that money away. He loses it all, and there's a famine. And next thing you know, he needs to get a job because he's wasted all his money. Now his job is feeding pigs. And he gets so low where he's hungry and he's staring at pig food, and he's like looking at that slop, and he's like hanging out with Timon and Pumbaa and being like, grub, you know. And so he thinks about eating that, and then he remembers what it was like being in his father's house, being somewhere where he was not only was he eating great, but he starts thinking about the workers that his father had, right? That the servants even ate decent. They had good meals. They weren't trying to eat pig stuff. So he decides to go back home and ask, he was, now that his life's humbled him, he was going to go back home and be like, hey, you know what, Dad, can I work for you? Like, I know I'm not worthy to be in your house, but like, I'll come work. Like, let me do that. And so let's go ahead and read and see what happens when he gets home at this point. In Luke chapter 15, verse 20, it says, And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. So at a distance, his father sees his raggedy, stinky son, and when he sees him, he can't wait. He goes up to him, he embraces him, he kisses him. His son must smell like pig. He probably hasn't showered. He's probably been wearing the same clothes, and he did not care. He had compassion on him. He didn't sit here and be like, yeah, that's what you get, dummy. You want to come back and be with daddy again? Like, no, he didn't give him that attitude. He was so happy. He had so much compassion. He was just so grateful to have his kid at home. And I know, I feel like mothers can relate on this on some level where, I remember when I was like 18, I wanted to go out, and my mom's like, I can't sleep until you come home. Like, come home, and then she could rest. Like, he was so glad. And that's the attributes that we should have as a father. We should have compassion. I'm not saying you need to be okay with your kid running off doing dumb things, but like, you just need to be so grateful and happy and embrace them when they come home and show them that, like, look, this is your house. And it's a parable. It's literally just teaching us. Jesus was teaching us on how God sees us, that every time we're making mistakes, every time we're sinning, every time we're doing dumb things, he doesn't care what we have done. What he wants is for us to come home and be with him. And that's the same way we need to be. Proverbs chapter 23, verse 13 through 14 says, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with a rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. And so lastly, what we're talking about here is, corporal punishment. In my household, we didn't have a rod, but we had a belt. And I'm alive. I'm right here. This verse is not lying. I got hit with the belt, and here I am. And I know a lot of times parents are like, oh, that's child abuse. Why would you hit them? Look, there's a fine line between child abuse. If you're making your kids bleed or breaking legs or something like that, then that might be a little too much. But like to get a spanking, I know some people overdo it, so I think they get scared to do it later. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with spanking. I know a lot of parents will sit there and be like, well, I can use my words, which is fine. I'm not against someone using words. I think it can be done. But I also think it's case by case. It's different for each individual. I have sisters and stuff, and I'm pretty sure I'm the one that got spanked the most. It was a case by case thing. We all got spanked, but I'm the one that got spanked the most, and I probably deserved it. And the one thing that I kind of think of that comes into mind for me when I'm reading this verse is like, let's say you're on the sidewalk and you're not holding your child's hand, and he's like 3 or 4 or something like that, and he takes off running and goes in the middle of the street. And I can just picture a parent pulling him and be like, what are you doing? Don't do that again. You could have died, and all this kind of stuff. And next thing you know, the kid's scared and he's crying and he's like, and other people are watching him get spanked, and what this verse is saying is you're saving him, right? Because a car could have hit him. Now, the kid maybe still at this point didn't realize that it could have been worse, but what he's going to think about next time is like, I'm not running in that middle of the street because I'm not trying to get spanked. That hurt last time. I'd rather something hurt than to have permanent physical damage or even death. And, if we don't correct our kids now when they're little, we don't correct them in the household, you can't expect them to go to school and have teachers put up with it and have teachers discipline them because they're not the parents and they can't do it, and then they're limited, and then people get offended that their kids are getting yelled at and stuff, and it's only happening because they're not learning at home. And the same thing happens now from infant to juvenile, and the next thing you know, they become an adult, and now you got the police dealing with them. Now the police have to deal with these kids who never learned any consequences, and now they've got to deal with consequences, and a lot of it has to come down with the fact that they didn't learn it as a child. So we learn now what a father is, but now let's go ahead and look at what God is, right? Is God our father? Is God a great father? Let's look at what, we've already shared that he is, but let's go ahead and look at these categories that I know a lot of people look at, that what they expect a father to be. So the first one is present, right? We expect a father to be present. And Joshua chapter 1 verse 9 says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. He's with you wherever you go. He's right here with me right now as I speak these words. There's no reason to be afraid of anything. Like, you have God no matter what circumstances you're in. He is omnipresent. Omnipresent means he's everywhere. If he created this place, he's everywhere. He's like oxygen. Oxygen is everywhere. Well, at least here where you're breathing, right? Because if there was no oxygen, you wouldn't be breathing, you wouldn't be there. Next, provider, right? We expect a father to be a provider. Is God a provider? Philippians chapter 4 verse 19. And my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches in glory in Christ Jesus. God provides everything for us, even the little things, even when you don't realize it. God is providing. If you end up getting something, if you're hungry and you're like, dude, I haven't eaten, and next thing you know, someone just comes and brings you a plate, you're just like, oh, thank you. No, thank God. God put it in their heart to come and give something to you. Oh, and then the other thing I want to touch on is, because it says according to his riches and glory and stuff like that. It's according to the way God decides to do things, right? Not the way we decide. And I think that's being a good father. It's like if your child were to ask you, like, look, hey, can I have candy for breakfast, candy for lunch, candy for dinner? And you're like, no, you're going to eat chicken and peas. You're going to eat waffles in the morning. Like you're eating things that are good for you. And, sometimes we can complain like as kids, like, oh, but I don't like peas. I don't like that. We can complain, but realistically, that's what being a good parent is. It isn't just pleasing them. Be like, I was like, oh, I want candy. Like, sure, here you go, here you go. Because all you're doing, you would be killing that child, giving them breakfast, lunch, and dinner candy, rotting their teeth, giving them high blood pressure, and who knows what else that comes with it, clogged arteries. Loving. Is God loving? Psalms 86, verse 15 says, but you, O Lord, are a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Here are more traits as a father that you should inherit. God loves you so much. He always gives. He always has mercy and grace, even when we don't deserve it. That's literally what that means. When we don't deserve it, we have it. And, he does not get mad right away. And what I think of, honestly, this reminds me of my mom when I think of the steadfast love, right? I think of a person who, like if I literally went out tonight and committed murder, as much as that would hurt my mom, as much as it would make her cry, and as much as I know she'd probably would be the first one if she found out that I did something like that to turn me in and be like, why'd you do that or whatever, she would be so hurt. But I know that wouldn't mean that she just automatically stopped loving me. She wouldn't support my decisions or anything like that, but she would still love me. And that's the type of love that we should have as a father. I'm not saying you got to endorse the crimes that somebody commits or anything like that and be like, oh, that's my son. And no, he would never, like, you still love him. It's still your kid, I don't know. That's just how God is, and that's how I know how my mother is. And then it talks about having a relationship, right? Having a relationship. James chapter 4, verse 8. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. All right. So think of someone who's like 18 and they're like, they just go get a job. Next thing you know, they end up moving to the Philippines. They go to another country. If you moved away, you can't have a relationship, right? You can't have a relationship with someone who's far away. Like, okay, nowadays it's a little easier. You can watch them through video, but you lose some bond. You lose some relation. You're distant from each other. And what this verse is saying is draw near. God is telling you to draw near to him. If you come close to him, then you guys can have a relationship. He's not going to force it. And it's almost like when like religion, right? Religion will sit there and be like, oh, you should give money to the poor. Like, you can go out and give money, and is it a good thing? Like, yeah, but if it's not coming from your heart, then it's not real. And God doesn't force things, right? So, if it's coming from your heart to go out and give somebody, it's like when when you get in trouble because you hit some kid or whatever when you were little, and the parent or a teacher is like, go say sorry. Like, you can go and be like, oh, I'm sorry, but like, you don't mean it, right? There's no realness to it. And what it's saying is like, you know what? If you come real, come looking for God, you go to God, you're gonna have God. He wants you to have that. He wants a relationship with you. He doesn't care about anything else. He wants a relationship with you. If you do not know that, you know that now. Marriage, right? Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. So, more things to look at, like I said. A husband should be leading their wife the same way Christ leads us, the same way he came down to teach us and die for us and shows he came to be an example. That's what we need to do. We need to be an example. We need to love wives that way. We need to have that. Christ, like I said, he did that for the church. We are the church. We need to do that for wives. And then to me, this is probably the most important attribute to have. It's the most important mindset to have. And it's the ultimate thing that God did for us, right? That Jesus did for us. And that sacrifice. Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says, but God shows his love for us, even that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He loves you so much. God loves you so much that he sent his son. He came in the flesh to come and teach you and was willing to die for you because he wants you. He wants you in his life. He wants a relationship with you. He wants to see you in heaven. He doesn't want you to go into hell. And wow, that's what we deserve. That's what he did. He came to sacrifice himself. And I think that's what men need to start learning is have sacrifice. If a child's crying at 2 a.m, if a baby's crying at 2 a.m. because he's hungry, you're going to get up and feed him, man. You got to learn how to sacrifice. You just got to do it. You got to go get a job. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to step up. You don't have time to be selfish. You don't have time to sleep, in some circumstances. You don't have time to have an expensive hobby, unless you can afford it, but you don't have time for that. I was playing soccer until I tore my meniscus, but let's say I wouldn't have. I was playing soccer. I would have had a kid. You know what? It's no longer about me playing soccer. It's about me taking the time to teach my kid how to play soccer. Let's invest in him. Let's have him join sports. Let's have him do things. It's not about me anymore. It's having sacrificing time, sacrificing money, sacrificing whatever you were used to, gym time. You do not have time for that stuff. Can you do some of that stuff? Yes, there's nothing wrong with you doing any of that. But you are to sacrifice. The first thing is to love God, your wife, and your children. That's the order. So we've gone over being present, being a provider, being loving, having a relationship with God, marriage, and sacrifice. And like I said, I really brought this up because, I was ignorant to this growing up. I didn't realize how many kids were growing up, how many men were growing up, or boys, I should say, were growing up without fatherly figures. And, I remember when I would play soccer, like so many guys would come up and want to talk to my dad and all this stuff. And honestly, I was a jealous child. I was like, dude, get away. Stay away from my dad. He's my dad. But it's just sad. It's sad. And we need to do something about this as a society, as a whole. We need to step up. We need to man up. We need to be men. We need to stop coming up with excuses. Stop letting women raise our kids. Stop saying like, well, no. Can we pick on women in certain things? Yes, we can. But let's own up. Let's man up. Let's take actions and let's accept, what we do wrong. Admit your own wrongdoings first. It's easy to point the finger, but let's own up to that kind of stuff. And if you're a father and you're already doing this, like kudos to you. I hope you could have learned something from this. But there's always room to improve as a human being. But I would like to see society change, and we need to teach. We need to get involved, whether even if it's just to go assist at school and or at church, or just volunteer somewhere, big brothers and sisters club, something. We need to give back. We need to give back. Little girls don't know what good men are, and boys don't know how to become men, and they don't know how to be a father because they are not taught this. Anyways, that's all I have for today. Let's go ahead and hopefully break this cycle together, starting one person at a time. If you know a father, or if you know someone who's going to become a father, or if you're thinking about becoming a father, or whatever it is, go ahead and do me a favor and just share this video, subscribe, like it, comment, whatever it is. With that, God bless, and I hope you all have a beautiful night. All right.